Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for coming to another talk at MSR on games. We're very happy today to be presenting Tracy Fullerton, who's a professor at USC's School of Cinematic Arts. She's written a book on game design, and of course the USC school has come out with some very compelling games which have gotten a lot of press, which Tracy will be showing. So for those of you watching remotely and inside here this room, thank you again very much, and have a great talk. Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks, John. To everyone who is out there watching on the internet, good morning, and to everyone here, good morning. Thanks so much for having me here. Today I want to talk about play, which is often thought of as being something that is not serious. But recently we have been investigating more serious aspects of play. And I just wanted to start with this thought from the New Games book. This is a quote from George Leonard from an essay that's part of the New Games book. And it speaks to the notion that how we play together may, in fact, be quite important and quite serious, and do nothing less than signify how we are in the world. So I think that's actually a very rich thought. This image is from the New Games movement. It's several hundred people sitting on each other's laps in a trust circle, which is a very, very simple kind of cooperative game. If you obey the rules, then everyone winds up sitting on each other in trust, and if anyone disobeys the rules or gets frightened and stands up, you have a domino effect. So I think it's an interesting place to start. My background is quite varied. I'm a game designer, and I guess what that means is that I'm curious about a lot of things. I never really decided on one thing that I wanted to do, and so every game that I do, I get a chance to think about and sort of deconstruct different types of systems. Throughout my career, I've worked on everything from interactive films to game shows to location-based entertainment. Today I'm a researcher, and I'm working on expanding the boundary, the sort of palette of game design, working on games that stretch the imagination. I work, as John mentioned, in the School of Cinematic Arts, best known for turning out people who make films, but I work in a newer division called the Interactive Media Division, and we're sort of that strange little division no one quite understands, where we make digital media and participatory media. And even smaller than that, I work in a section of the Interactive Media Division. I have a lab called the Game Innovation Lab. And in this lab, our charter is really to ask the most difficult questions that we know how to ask about what games are and what they might become. So I use the word innovation in the title of the lab, and I think we need to step back and ask a question of what do we mean by innovation? It's thrown around as a word quite a bit, and we need to really think about what we mean. For me, personally, what it means is designing games that have unique mechanics, right? Not games that have already been designed, but creating mechanics that perhaps express my own personal perspective on the world, or come from my own personal experience. It also means to me appealing to new players. So right now there's a hardcore group of players. There's a developing casual group of players, and I think what's important to understand that before digital media, games belonged to everyone, and they were perceived as something that everyone did. Families playing games together, multi-generational play was quite common. Today, often you'll ask someone and they'll say, well, I'm not a gamer. But if you pursue the question, you'll find out that in fact they do play one game or another. They just don't present themselves or self-identify as a gamer. I want to kind of take that back and have games owned by everyone. Trying to solve complicated problems in game design. So there are some holy grails of game design out there that I think we can attack in a place like the lab because we have the freedom to fail. So if we try to attack the problems of story and learning and creating empathy for characters and we fail, that's all right. We haven't missed Christmas or something like that. We've just taken a risk. So that's what I mean by innovation. And I want to give some examples because sometimes it's a little abstract when you just say, well, this is what I mean, attacking a difficult problem. So I want to give some examples of difficult problems. An old friend just walked in, so this is Old Home Day. Some examples of difficult problems. Can we make a game about a genocide of a people? I said before that games are perceived as being non-serious. Well, I think that genocide is about the most serious topic you could address. And when one of my graduate students came to me and said, I want to make a game about genocide, I had to caution her that this might not be a great idea. She might not be able to accomplish it with tact and empathy for the people involved. But Susana Ruiz, who was the designer of this game, really thought through the problem of putting you in the perspective of a person who is in one of these refugee camps. So in this game, you actually, one of the scenes, you play a child, it's in the bottom right-hand corner, who's sent out to gather water. You have to escape from the militia who are chasing you. And one of the things that you learn is that they don't send out men to do this task because they'll be killed if they're caught immediately. They don't send out women because they'll be raped. They send out children because the chances of them being let through are much higher. So they send out children to do this difficult, dangerous task because they have a higher percentage chance of making it back, which I think is one of the reasons this game is so powerful, because you're put in the shoes of a child sent out into the desert to fetch water for the village. It's very difficult to do it, but if you get to the well and then manage to make your way back, you are able to take that water and use it to reconstruct the village. It's not a difficult, it's a difficult task. It's not a difficult game, but it's a difficult task. The game itself is actually quite simple, but you're always on the edge of failing. So you have to use this water to grow the gardens. You have to distribute medical supplies. There are very simple mechanics that are built into the simulation. And again, once you run out of water, you have to go back out into the desert and fetch more. You learn about what will happen to people in the village in certain conditions. And if you don't make it, if you actually aren't able to keep the village alive, then at a certain point it'll be attacked. Throughout the game are calls to action, to write your congressman, to get involved. And this is one of the things that I think is so interesting about this game, is that it was put up on MTV's site and has had over 2 million plays. And the designer was asked to come and testify in front of a group of congressmen about the crisis. It's had a huge impact for young people because it's speaking to them in a medium that they understand. Another question that we ask at the lab, this is a little more abstract, is can we make a game that encourages self-paced challenge? So an interesting part of learning, I think we all are familiar with this, but it's not built into our classrooms, is that we all learn at our own pace. Right? We all learn when we're ready to. And we wanted to make a game that took that into account. Most games pace you, right? You have to get through the level. You have to achieve the objectives, and you can't go on until you do. But if you say we're going to learn something like a musical instrument, one day you would attack a difficult song, and if you couldn't accomplish it, then you might go back to an easier song, try something, and you pace yourself, right? We wanted to see if we could build that into the mechanic of the game. So we made a game called Flow. It's actually based on a psychological theory of how people attack and enjoy difficult tasks. And so what the theory supposes is that if we're able to keep in between this sort of tight channel of frustration and boredom, if we're able to have a pacing that keeps us right in that flow channel, then the task itself will become much more engaging, and we'll actually learn more and we'll enjoy it, even though it's a difficult task. So in flow, there are no levels to complete. You choose when it's time to go on to the next level. You choose when it's time to go deeper into this primordial soup. You play a little creature that goes around eating smaller creatures, and as you eat, you grow and change. What you eat changes what you will eventually become. So if you eat different things, you'll look differently in the end. And you can sort of see in the murk behind you what's coming up, what big scary creatures are down below. And when you think you're strong enough, when you think it's time to go, then you eat the red pill and you sink deeper. And if you're scared, you can eat the blue pill and you can rise higher if you don't think you're ready yet. This game is started in the lab as a research project, went online, had several million hits, and was picked up by Sony, and it's now actually the #1 downloadable game on the PS3. And I wanted to just play a little trailer from it. So that's an example, actually, and I think it's an interesting one, of research going out into the commercial space and having an impact. It's the beginning of what I hope is a larger genre of game, which I'm starting to call reflective games or meditative games, games which allow the user a space in which to think and consider what's going on, rather than just having action, action, action all the time. Some other questions we've asked are, is it possible for games to promote understanding and participation, which we desperately need in our system of government? The Redistricting Game just was launched recently from the Capitol. As far as I know, it's the first game to be launched from the nation's capital. And it allows you to understand dynamically how the redrawing of district lines changes the outcome of elections. So you have to actually go through a process of redrawing maps, getting feedback from all the different representatives, and then getting them approved at the various levels of government. And you find out how very difficult it is to actually do this, and again, how it influences the outcomes of elections. I think this is a huge problem in the game system of our government that many people don't understand. When the researchers were working on this game, they said, you know, government or politics are a game, and this is a game that teaches you how to game that game, if you will. Another project that we're just starting asks the question, can we use games to teach history and civic engagement? This is a project that's just launching right now. It's part of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's History and Civics Initiative. And this is something that we're going to be making a game to teach constitutional issues. Hopefully, this game will transport the students to the center of historical moments and make them feel the impact of constitutional issues as they play out in history. So understanding the Constitution is sort of a dry thing, right? But if you can find those moments where they truly affected people, this is an example of the integration of Central High. You find those moments and those people who played their parts. I think we can bring constitutional issues alive. And one of the things we really want to do is make the students in this case feel like researchers. So they're going to have to go out and find primary resources as part of the gameplay and attach those resources to game objects to make them work. So this is something I'm going to get into in a minute, but making the mechanics model the learning, I think, is one of the key issues in bringing learning into games. One of the other things this game is going to do, hopefully, is align with national standards in media that students are already engaging with, right? So on the left you have a kind of classic textbook, and on the right you have a graphic novel. This game will have a game component, a graphic novel component, there'll be online creativity tools, there'll be broadcast components. The idea is to reach students where they already are and to, say, take the learning objectives and bring them into media that, well, they look a whole lot more fun than your classic textbook. And I think this brings up a really good question as we bring games into classrooms. Every time you bring a new type of media into a classroom, you have to consider what it's teaching, what it does best. So if you bring a blackboard into a classroom, or you bring a textbook into a classroom, it's going to teach certain types of knowledge very well, and other types it's not going to teach so well. So I think we need to ask the question. We can't just boldly go, which is somewhat of what's happening. People were saying, games are great, let's make games for learning. Let's just put games in classrooms. I think we really have to question what it is that games do well, how they do that, and decide what it is that we can learn from games. And then we need to develop new design methods for creating games that really do teach those standards, that really do reach students. So right now there's sort of an idea that if you take a domain expert in a subject, you take game designers and you take evaluators and you put them all together, that somehow these people all separately are going to make a game that teaches a subject. And I think that we have to go further than that. I think that we really need to develop a process and a literacy on the part of all of those people in each other's disciplines. So domain experts are going to have to understand game design to a certain extent. And game designers are going to have to understand the domains they want to express ideas about. Evaluators are a little different, but they're strange people anyways. So we need to develop, I think, a more standard process and a literacy in what games are and how they teach already, and how we can bring the new ideas that we want to teach with them and be able to do this effectively. One of the things that I've learned in making these new learning games is that the cognitive load of learning game mechanics is very high. So learning the rules of a game puts a real load on your system. And if the game mechanics themselves are not aligned with the learning goals, students will learn the game mechanics, but they will not address the learning goals, right? Because they're interested in winning the game. So that means that the learning goals have to be tightly aligned with the mechanics of the game. This is a book that I wrote a couple years. I'm actually going to put a new edition out called Game Design Workshop, and it focuses on something I think is a step towards that process. I wouldn't say that we're there. I would say that we're moving towards that process that we're going to need to develop. And it's what I call playcentric design. The notion being that we involve players in the design process, that we do rapid physical prototyping of digital products. You know, a lot of times I'll talk to software engineers and they say, oh, but you can't model the dynamic aspects of, say, a first-person shooter that way. And I say, well, you know, that's true, but we've already solved the part where you're walking through the space and exploring. What we need to solve is what's in the space and the sort of puzzle aspects of the experience. So we can do that on paper. It's called Dungeons and Dragons, you know. So physical prototyping allows us a lot of freedom and flexibility and creativity, and it also allows those non-technical domain experts to participate at a very, very high level in the design process. And that's something that's really interesting to me. So as we're developing this new process of bringing, say, people who want to teach math and science or people who want to teach history and civics into the game design process, we need to think about developing methods that allow them in very early and at a very high level. Anyone who's familiar with Agile development is familiar with this diagram, but this is a really key part of the playcentric process, that we formalize our ideas somehow, that we create a prototype of some type, that we test those ideas and evaluate them in a very tight circle. At the Game Innovation Lab where I teach, I'm trying to develop an army of students who would never think of writing a spec before they actually have a working prototype. That they would come up with an idea, create a paper prototype, get it in front of the potential users and test it before they would ever sit down and write hundreds of pages on how that would be produced. And I hope that we can get these students out into the industry and they can start making a difference in that way, because it really does matter if you bring the player and player feedback into the design process early. I can't stress that enough. These are some of my students doing usability and playability testing. They not only do paper testing, but they also are trained very early on in the rudimentary tasks of usability. I wouldn't say that they're experts in it, but they're trained in the process so that when they go out into the industry, they will just as a matter of course put into their schedules usability and playability testing. And I think if we're going to make these games that impact learning, they're also going to have to understand assessment. So that's probably going to have to become a part of our curriculum as well, understanding how evaluation and assessment fits into the game design process. So one of the things that I find so fascinating about bringing new ideas into games is that if we're going to use games to create meaning, if we're going to make history games and math games and science games, we have to understand that games create meaning at multiple levels. They create meaning at the level of their formal elements, at the levels of their system procedures. So the actual rules that players are abiding by create meaning for them. They create meaning at the dramatic level, at the level of premise and character and story. And this is the one that we're most familiar with. This is the one that if I get calls from parents all the time saying, okay, so my student's going to learn how to write stories for games, right? Yeah, sort of, but they're also going to be learning these formal elements and how to express themselves within those formal elements. And they create meaning at another level, which is at a dynamic level. So once that system is put into motion, once that system is put into play, there are all these loose-fitting parts that allow people to express themselves within the system, and they create meaning at that level as well. I want to focus for just a minute, though, on the game mechanics because I think as I said, I think the dramatic elements are fairly well understood how those representations create meaning. But I don't think that when we go to design games for learning that we're quite as aware of how game mechanics create meaning. So game mechanics, just to be clear, when I'm speaking of game mechanics, what I mean are those discrete units of structure, things like movement or exploration, combat, buying, selling, trading, etc. All of these pieces of system that are fit together to make the actual game experience. And they often model some aspect of reality. And it turns out that they make statements on that reality because by modeling something, you're always leaving something out. And when you leave something out, you're making a statement. So let's just take as example something like classic strategy games have mechanics like movement, they have an abstracted territory, they have capture and killing. They also have complete information and turn-taking. And what they do is they tend to model a world in which fairness plays a part, right? And where rationality is more important than, say, the roll of a die. So these games present us with a notion of the world in which strategy can overwhelm strength. Now, whether that's a true vision of the world, I don't know, but it's one that's very powerful to us. Modern strategy games also have movement, territory, capture, and killing, but they change some things. They hide information from us, right? There's no turns. Everyone moves at once. There are more players, so we're no longer in a head-to-head competition. It's no longer two armies standing across a battlefield shooting at one another. Now we have a very complex battlefield, and we have chance. And what these games are doing, I think, what game designers who are working on these games do, they're expressing themselves, they're expressing the world as a less rational place. And I think that's one of the reasons including the technology, that's one of the reasons they developed today and not thousands of years ago. First-person shooter is another example. So in all cultures, there have always been monster games. The game of it and tag is one of the first things that any culture develops, is one of the first things that any child will play with a parent, for example. And they sort of model, first-person shooters model this roughhouse play that we are all so familiar with. And in this, there are ideas, again, that are communicated about the world. The world is a hostile place. Survival is key. In order to survive, you have to essentially destroy everything that moves, everything that pops out of a corner at you. This is very, very exciting, and it's training us to think about the world in a certain way. So let's just say we wanted to make games, but we didn't want to express those particular messages. We wanted to express something new. Can we take those same mechanics and create games that express something new? And I would have to argue that you can do it sometimes, but you're going to reach the limitations of your palette unless you expand that palette. So for example, you can take classic mechanics. Here's a missile command. Everybody's probably familiar with missile command. You shoot the missile and it takes a while to get there, right? So it's a delayed reaction. That's the essence of the mechanic. There's a game called September 12th in which you have a isometric view of a village, and you need to shoot the terrorists, but you're trying to avoid the villagers. You shoot a missile. It takes a while to get there. So you're seeing these terrorists run around and you shoot at them, but by the time the missile gets there, it's actually a villager or a building that you're hitting, right? And you use what will happen in this particular game is that if you hit innocent bystander or you destroy a building, people will come and pray and cry, and then they'll get up and turn into terrorists. Somebody told me recently, I haven't played it this way, but they told me that if you actually play the game by not ever shooting a missile, eventually all the terrorists will turn back into people, which I think is a pretty interesting idea. So that takes a classic mechanic and maps another type of idea onto it. Here's another example. This is a game called Haiti, The Cost of Life. And this takes the sim-like mechanic of The Sims, where you are caretaking individuals in a family unit, and rather than dealing with opulence, so rather than wondering whether you should buy them a hot tub or a big, flat screen television, you have to wonder whether or not you should send one of your children to school while the others work in the field. And Haiti was actually really interesting because it was designed by a game company called Game Lab in conjunction with Global Kids. And Global Kids brought in a group of kids to help in the design process. And many of them were of Haitian extract, and so that's why they chose to do a game about Haiti, because it was really interesting to them. And so it's a really powerful little game, and you can find it at the, I think it's at the UN site. So what I'm getting at here is this notion that the mechanics of the game are the message. Yes, there are other messages. Yes, there are other representations in the game. But understanding how those mechanics interrelate with the content that you're building for is an imperative. And understanding how games that we're already playing create meaning through the mechanics is required of us if we want to expand the palette of game design. I have an example of us trying to do this in the lab. So we basically pose this as a question to ourselves. This is not a learning game per se, although it's actually been used by a number of people for health applications because it's such a relaxing meditative game. But the original question for this game was, can we make a game that evokes all of the opposite emotions that most games evoke? So most games are very challenging, they're competitive, they're aggressive, they're very fast. So we thought, well, can we do exactly the opposite? Is that possible? And we sat down and tried to work on that problem. And we came up with a game called Cloud. These are some early prototypes. There were paper prototypes as well, but I didn't have the foresight to take pictures. We started in 2D and just really worked through the mechanic of what could it be that you do in this world that evokes these very archetypal emotions of, say, laying back in the grass on a summer's day, watching the clouds, and just wishing that just one of those clouds would just push a little bit farther so that it would look like a walrus, right? If we just keep going, it would just look exactly right. We did a lot of user testing. We built a dynamic sky, and there's a lot of technical information that I could go into, but I don't really have time. The clouds are a Leonard Jones particle fluid dynamic simulation, and the camera controls allow you to fly very close with the character or very far away, increasing the emotion at the tight level, increasing the amount of information one has at far away, and that's all user controllable. And I want to show just a little bit of this because the game, which we thought was going to be just a unique little experiment that we did, we put it up on our site one day in November, and it was a student server. And by Monday, we had 10,000 downloads and the server had crashed. So then we went to the university and said, well, will you put it on your site? So they said, okay, that's fine. So we put it on their site. And by the next week, we had 30,000 downloads, and their server had crashed. And so we went to EA. We said, you got to help us out here. We have too many. We can't afford to distribute this. So we put it on the EA site, and it's closing on 2 million downloads at this point. And it's we get letters from people all around the world thanking us for making this game. So I'm just showing you just a little bit of it. How to gather your main resource, which are friendly clouds. You have to convert the clouds to be bright white before they're yours. And one of the things that's very interesting about this game is that if you move too quickly, you'll lose your clouds. So they have a sort of a feeling like Mercury. So once you start gathering a huge group together, if you start speeding through the sky, they'll kind of trail off from you. And that was part of the design decision, trying to reach that goal of changing the message. In most games, in most, say, first-person shooters, you're moving at a relative speed of about 40 to 50 miles per hour through the 3D environment. And it gives you a huge sense of empowerment, right? We wanted to empower you by slowing you down and causing you to just be engaged in the moment. So I'm going to speed ahead just a little bit. After you learn how to gather your clouds, you can sort of suck them up. There's no really good terminology for that. You can sort of suck them up, and then you can use them to draw in the sky, like a skywriter. And in later levels, let me actually just jump to a little later level here. In later levels, we actually give you goals. So this one, the boy is dreaming of a lollipop in the sky in the second level. And we ask you to actually draw that lollipop with your clouds. This is taken from a user testing session, so this person is not maybe the best. One of the interesting decisions we made is that the game itself plays on a 2D plane, but in order to achieve our goal of that sense of awe, that sense of laying back in the grass and looking up at the clouds, we allow you a free-form feature. So once you've drawn your lollipop, you can go down and look at it from below, or you can fly up above and look at it from above and admire it. Also, there's no time limit in this game. There's no score, so I was mentioning that the lollipop maybe wasn't so artistic. There's no score. You don't have to complete the objectives. In fact, people have written to us and they've told us that they just spend time flying around the world. And a lot of people have written to us and asked us to make a multiplayer version so that they can play with their children. Later in the game, you find that there's another character. There are dark clouds. And dark clouds are not what you would expect. They're not enemies. They are, in fact, the balance to your white clouds, and when you combine them, you make rain. And if you can stack them and combine large enough stacks of dark and light clouds, you create thunder and lightning and rain. And you can use your powers to balance the nature in this little archipelago. So in some levels there's pollution, there are threatening little islands. This is the final level where a huge volcano is threatening a little town, and you have to create a thunder and lightning storm above the volcano to put out the flames, save the people. Okay, so Cloud was our first experiment in really trying to create brand new mechanics that communicate essentially new feelings, new ideas. A game that I'm just completing right now is called The Night Journey. And the question here is a little impertinent. It's, can we use game technologies to explore the journey to enlightenment? Luckily, I'm not alone on this journey. I'm working with an artist. His name is Bill Viola. And Bill is one of the earliest video artists to be exhibited in galleries. His work, if you're not familiar with it, is often described as a search for enlightenment through attention to transcendent detail. And it's just beautiful. And he's been an amazing person to work with. He's always interested in new technologies, and when he came to us and asked us to work with him on this game about enlightenment, I have to admit that I had some trepidation about coming up to his standards because his imagery is quite beautiful. All of his work is inspired by spiritual texts. These are some of the illuminated manuscripts that he brought to show us. One of his original ideas for this game was that it be a sort of living, illuminated manuscript. And so, with my attention to mechanics, of course, I said, all right, let's build a paper prototype. You want to make spiritual enlightenment? Let's make a role-playing game. And that's where we started. We started with paper prototyping. And I think it was a brand new experience for him, but he was more than willing to go with our design process. Luckily, he also had a design process of his own, and so speaking with us and sort of bringing us into his process, I think merged these two ways of working, one on games and one on his beautiful art, and brought us something entirely new. We decided, rather than, say, creating an illuminated manuscript, that we'd use Bill's prior work as a visual text. that we in fact started to create an archive of his work and reconstruct special areas until we had an ability to create a whole world that referenced these amazing images and moments that are in his prior work and then build on it for the new work. These are some images from the game as it stands today. It's a very large world that you can explore. It's a world that merges seamlessly video and 3D imagery. And I wanted to show just a little bit of a demo. The mechanics that we decided on, the mechanics that are now the basis of the game, are exploration in this very, very large world and what we call reflection. And reflection is a very simple mechanic. This uses a gamepad controller, so you just use the thumbsticks like it's basically like Halo to move and look around. And then you use the X key to reflect. And when you reflect, you'll see in the video piece I'm going to show, it transforms the world visually, but it also transforms your abilities in the world. So you are actually powering up, if you will, by reflecting on the world until your perspective will change. You will actually be able to glide up and above the world if you reflect enough. This is a vast simplification, I realize, of the journey to enlightenment, but our concern was that it feel like the journey to enlightenment. If we could have the lights down, actually. Thank you. And this is kind of low soon. A set of post-processing filters to mimic the look of the early video grainy cam technology that Bill uses often in his work. So this is all post-processing on top of the 3D imagery. And this piece is meant to be played in galleries, so it had to be extraordinarily simple. So we give you prompts. Most gamers would know what to do already. Now the person is pushing the X button. We take control of the view and transform the imagery. Sometimes the visions that you get when you reflect are a clue to tell you where to go. Sometimes they're just something that enhances and maybe expands the meaning of what you're looking at. Just because of time, I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. There's a reoccurring figure in the world that you're following. It is, in fact, the story of of a single person's journey. Reflection, as I mentioned, transforms the world visually, but also has effect on your own ability to move through the world, and affects one other thing, and that is the length of the journey itself. So if you don't reflect, the sun will set on you. If you reflect, it pushes back the night and gives you more time to explore. Eventually the sun will set on you anyways, which we think is appropriate, but that's actually sort of a beautiful occurrence as well. So I'll just forward to that. I mentioned earlier that I was really interested in creating mechanics that gives the player space to reflect, and I think that's one of the primary things that this game does. It's certainly not a hurried game, and even though I would argue that it actually has arcade structure in that you have a life, and if you don't keep it alive, if you don't reflect enough, you lose your life. It certainly it doesn't feel like that to the player because it happens at such an extremely slow pace. When you fall asleep, when the night finally falls on you, you dream, and you dream in the original references. So the pieces of video that we created the world from, and sometimes you dream of things that you haven't seen in the world, and you might go find in your next life. And sometimes you dream of things that you have seen. So I will actually end that. And I will say that one of the interesting things about the user testing for this game was that because we know it's going to be played by people who have never held a gamepad in their hands before, we had to bring in two groups of players. One was a group that identified themselves as having gone to a gallery in the last 6 months, a museum or gallery, and being familiar, not wildly familiar, but at least having heard of the work of Belviola. On the other hand, we had players who were game players who were not familiar with the work of Belviola, but who self-identified as having interest in experimental games. And so the user testing sessions were essentially we would do a round with each of these, make changes, and try and pull these two groups together so that it was simple enough and rewarding enough for a person in a gallery coming up and saying, "Oh my God, I've never touched one of these. Is it okay if I press this?" To a gamer who's going to pick it up and go, "Okay, what can I do? What can I figure out?" There are enough underlying rules and mysteries to be figured out to satisfy a gamer, and enough simplicity to satisfy someone who's playing a game for the first time. My next game is going to take Walden by Thoreau and apply some of the learning that we've done in these other reflective games to a classic piece of literature, and hopefully bring the learning goals that I was speaking about earlier to the reflective and meditative play that I've been speaking about, and merge them together in a single evocative play space that is based on this piece of classic literature and philosophy. So I just want to wrap up because I think we're at the hour. One of the things that I think is key is that we have an integration of learning goals and game mechanics, and we can't just use the game mechanics that we have today. We're going to have to develop more and new game mechanics. We're going to have a process by which we do that. So studying how games create meaning through these mechanics, experimenting and taking risks is key, because in the end we're only going to be able to express as much as those game mechanics will support. So with that, I will ask if there are any questions. Yeah?
So I heard the accusation before about, first-person shooters causing people to be less social or more prone towards violence and stuff like that. Is there some study that can give me numbers on that, or is that just wrong?
I'm not accusing first-person shooters of that. Yeah.
People are saying that games cause you to be...
Yeah, that's called media effects. Okay, so the study of media effects is a highly controversial field. Whether or not media actually causes effects, or whether or not there are other factors in a person's life that are that they then latch onto in, say, violent media, is something that's under contention. There are some people who swear that games will cause violence, and there are some people who swear the opposite. I'm not particularly interested. I think that in general, I prefer to fill my life with media that is deeper and richer than one particular thing. So I play Halo. I'm a big Halo player, very excited for Halo 3, but I have other things in my life. And so I don't think I'm in any particular danger of allowing that to influence me. And I think that the question is one of it's political, what you're asking, right? Because it all boils down to whether or not we should have violent games, or whether or not we should restrict them from certain people. I'm of the opinion that games are expressive, obviously, and as such need to be protected as expressive media. And I'm also of the opinion, on the other side, that games need to take it upon themselves, that game designers need to take it upon themselves to expand the range of content that we are expressing. And the argument will go away, because if we can express more than just a single note of human experience, then I think it will not become such an interesting question to ask. So I'm not the right person to ask about media effects studies, because I actually don't believe in them that much. So, John.
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you another question about media effects.
Okay.
So that statement, I've heard a lot of people say things similar throughout my job, betrays a premise that I'm not sure is readily known, and that is that games somehow affect people more than movies. Because nobody would say natural born killers, we hold these people responsible for that sort of movie, and what are the consequences? Is there proof that interactive storytelling is closer, affects people more than movies do?
Not that I know of. I mean, as I said, it's a pretty controversial field, right? And it's a pretty new field that we're studying. So to say, is there any conclusive evidence that comparatively film or games affect us more than film? I've never seen anything conclusive. In fact, I don't know that there are any comparative studies. I've seen some comparative studies on emotions triggered in games versus films. That's the closest thing I've seen. Yeah. Other questions? Bob.
Are you finding, like, when you're working on the
night journey
piece, where it gets closer and closer to this kind of life emulation in these very small chapters, kind of? Do you find that there's less or more need for character development? Because as the player, you bring yourself and project yourself into it? Right. Or do you want to put on this like coat of a character, the way you think about traditional narrative?
In the night journey, the character is the world. So what a character is becomes a different question. Characterization becomes very important. But there is no I in the night journey. Now, Walden is a different thing, actually, because we're starting to tackle this problem of where's the row in Walden. The game mechanic of Walden is something of a cross between Night Journey or Myst and Animal Crossing. And in Animal Crossing, you get a little character, right? But we don't want that. That seems a little cliche. We don't want you to come in and just make a little guy to go on a philosophical, sojourn. So Walden will have the character of Thoreau in it, and he will be your semi-avatar. He's not your avatar. We're actually playing on the line between your character and a character who you follow / engage with. I guess the simple answer to your question is that my understanding of character is changing as I work on these. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
You brought up the sort of question of what teaching does a game do best.
Yes.
I think I know how you're going to answer this, but do you have some heuristics that you've decided upon?
Well, here's what I wouldn't actually put it that way, but what I've found is that, actually I'm going to quote Frank Lantz. You know Frank Lantz? He's a game designer, and he said, I heard him say recently, this century is a century in which we're going to look below magic thinking to the systematic nature of the world below. So what I actually had, when I quoted Bill, said that Bill's way of looking at spiritual enlightenment was to sort of pay attention to transcendent detail. Frank's point is that we're going to look below that surface to the systematic nature of the world below. And I think that in teaching for games, that's what we need. We need to look below the surface of, let's just take history, for example, and understand the systematic nature of what's going on in the Constitution and how those interoperating elements of articles and amendments and precedents and issues and rulings and opinions and prejudices come together in a particular historical moment, and deconstruct that and allow people to play with that. It's actually sort of heretical, because what it means is that you can't teach history as a timeline anymore. You have to teach it as a set of interoperating elements, right? And it means you have to be okay with people playing with history. But historians have done this forever. There's no one way to interpret a primary source document, right? So I'm not really answering your question directly, because the way that I think about it is more like from a design point of view, which is how do we get there? How do we dig underneath the surface and get there? And I work with people who are very good evaluators and very good usability experts, and they ask that question. So I'm going to leave that to them, and I'm just going to say, as a game designer, the most important thing is that you give them the meat to work with. So, other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for coming. I know it's early. Everyone commented on that, but I really appreciate you coming out this morning. And thank you to everyone who isn't here, too. All right. Okay.